What if I told you that the most dangerous red flags in a relationship don't look like anger, cheating, or shouting? They sound calm, casual, and even loving. Some of the most harmful men don't hurt you with actions first. They hurt you with words that slowly teach you to doubt your worth. And if a man ever says these 7 things to you, this isn't a misunderstanding, it's a warning. Stay with me, because this could save you months or even years of emotional pain. Words are often the very first place where emotional manipulation shows itself, long before any obvious action ever does. Most people think manipulation looks dramatic, shouting, controlling behavior, or clear disrespect. But in reality, it usually begins quietly, through language that slowly reshapes how you see yourself, your feelings, and your reality. A person doesn't need to raise their voice to take away your confidence. Sometimes all it takes is a sentence spoken often enough for you to start doubting your own instincts. Manipulative words work because they don't feel dangerous at first. They are wrapped in calm tones, casual remarks, or even jokes. Statements like "you're too sensitive" or "you're overthinking" seem harmless on the surface, but over time they teach you an unhealthy lesson that your emotional responses cannot be trusted. Instead of listening to what you feel, you begin filtering every reaction through the other person's approval. This is where manipulation gains power, when you stop trusting yourself more than you trust them. Language shapes reality. When someone consistently reframes situations using dismissive or minimizing words, they quietly take control of the narrative. If you express hurt and are told you're being dramatic, the focus shifts away from their behavior and onto your reaction. This tactic allows the manipulator to avoid responsibility, while making you feel guilty for having normal emotional needs. Over time, you may start apologizing not because you did something wrong, but because you expressed how something made you feel. Another subtle way manipulation reveals itself through words is inconsistency. Promises are made in beautiful language, but rarely backed by action. When questioned, the response is often vague or emotionally charged, such as "why can't you just trust me?" This creates confusion, which is a powerful tool. Confused people are easier to control because they are constantly trying to regain emotional balance instead of questioning the situation. Words become a smokescreen that hides a lack of integrity. Manipulative language also tests boundaries. It starts small, a comment that belittles your opinion, a joke at your expense, or a remark that subtly compares you to someone else. If you stay silent, the language escalates. Each unchallenged sentence teaches the other person how much they can get away with. Before long, you may find yourself tolerating words that would have once felt unacceptable, all in the name of keeping the peace. One of the most damaging effects of manipulative language is how it isolates you from others. Phrases like "they don't really care about you like I do," or "everyone is against us," are designed to make you emotionally dependent. These words plant doubt about the intentions of friends and family, while positioning the manipulator as the only safe place. By the time isolation becomes visible through actions, the emotional groundwork has already been laid through language. Perhaps the most telling sign of emotional manipulation in words is how they make you feel afterward. Healthy communication may be uncomfortable at times, but it never leaves you feeling smaller, ashamed, or confused about your worth. Manipulative language, however, drains you. You replay conversations in your head, wondering if you said something wrong or imagined the problem. This mental exhaustion is not accidental. It is the result of someone slowly teaching you to question your reality. That is why words matter so deeply in relationships. Actions may eventually reveal the truth, but words often reveal it first. When you learn to listen not just to what someone says, but how their words make you feel about yourself, you gain clarity. Emotional manipulation loses its power the moment you recognize it. The ability to walk away often begins with a single realization. Love does not require you to doubt your worth or silence your voice. Invalidating your feelings is one of the clearest and most damaging red flags in any relationship, yet it is often misunderstood or overlooked because it doesn't always appear as obvious cruelty. It can sound calm, logical, or even caring on the surface, which is why it is so dangerous. When someone consistently dismisses how you feel, they are not just disagreeing with you, they are denying your emotional reality. Over time, this can quietly erode your confidence, your voice, and your sense of self. Emotional invalidation often begins subtly. You share that something hurt you, and instead of curiosity or concern, you're met with phrases like "you're too sensitive," "it's not a big deal," or "you're making a problem out of nothing." These responses teach you that your feelings are inconvenient or wrong. Rather than feeling heard, you feel embarrassed for speaking up. Slowly, you begin to question whether your emotions are justified at all, even when they are clear and reasonable. The problem with invalidation is not just the words themselves, but the message beneath them. When your feelings are dismissed, the unspoken message is that your inner world doesn't matter. A healthy partner may not always agree with you, but they will always respect your emotional experience. They may say, "I don't see it the same way, but I want to understand why you feel this way." Invalidation, on the other hand, shuts down conversation and shifts blame onto you for feeling anything at all. Over time, constant invalidation trains you to silence yourself. You stop expressing discomfort because it leads to conflict, defensiveness, or ridicule. You start choosing peace over honesty, even when it costs you your emotional well-being. This self-censorship is not a sign of maturity or compromise, it's a survival response. You learn that being emotionally open is unsafe, so you shrink your needs to fit what the other person is willing to acknowledge. Invalidating behavior is also closely tied to control. When someone decides which emotions are acceptable and which are not, they gain power over the relationship. If you are only allowed to feel happiness, gratitude, or admiration, but not disappointment, anger, or hurt, then the relationship exists on their terms. This imbalance creates emotional dependency, where you seek approval not just for your actions, but for your feelings themselves. One of the most harmful outcomes of emotional invalidation is the internal damage it causes. You may start gaslighting yourself, replaying conversations and wondering if you overreacted or imagined the pain. Your intuition, which once guided you, becomes quieter. You may feel anxious, expressing even small concerns, afraid they'll be dismissed or turned against you. Over time, this can lead to chronic self-doubt, emotional numbness, or the belief that you are simply too much for anyone to love properly. It's important to understand that invalidation is not the same as conflict or disagreement. Two people can disagree passionately and still validate each other's feelings. Invalidation happens when one person refuses to acknowledge the other's emotional truth. It is a lack of empathy, not a difference of opinion. When someone truly cares about you, your emotions matter to them, even when they don't fully understand them. Recognizing invalidation as a red flag is an act of self-respect. It means trusting that your feelings exist for a reason and deserve acknowledgement. You don't need permission to feel hurt, disappointed, or uncomfortable. A relationship should be a place where your emotions are met with curiosity, care, and respect, not dismissal. The moment you realize that someone repeatedly makes you feel wrong for having feelings at all, you are seeing a truth that should not be ignored. Excuses and emotional growth may sound similar on the surface, especially when someone speaks convincingly about their intentions, but they are fundamentally different. Emotional growth is demonstrated through awareness, accountability, and consistent change. Excuses, on the other hand, are explanations designed to protect comfort, avoid responsibility, and maintain the status quo. When you learn to recognize the difference, you gain clarity about whether someone is truly evolving or simply saying what keeps you around. People who rely on excuses often sound self-aware. They may acknowledge a flaw and immediately follow it with a justification. Phrases like "that's just how I am," "I've always been like this," or "this is because of my past" can initially feel honest or vulnerable. However, self-awareness without action is not growth. Naming a problem does not equal working on it. When someone repeatedly explains their behavior but never changes it, the explanation becomes a shield rather than a step forward. Emotional growth requires discomfort. It involves sitting with the realization that your behavior has hurt someone and choosing to do better, even when it feels inconvenient or challenging. Excuses avoid that discomfort. They shift focus away from the impact of the behavior and onto the reason behind it. While understanding context is important, it should never replace responsibility. A painful past may explain behavior, but it does not excuse the refusal to change it. One of the clearest signs of excuses disguised as growth is repetition. The same apology is offered again and again, followed by the same behavior. The words may sound sincere, but there is no new effort, no adjustment, and no learning. Over time, you may find yourself accepting promises instead of progress, hoping that this time things will be different. True growth shows itself in patterns that change, not in apologies that repeat. Excuses also often place emotional labor on the other person. You are asked to be patient, understanding, or forgiving while waiting for change that never arrives. You may be told that you are asking for too much or that growth takes time, yet no clear steps are ever taken. Emotional growth does take time, but it also takes intention. It includes therapy, reflection, open conversations, and changed behavior, not just words designed to buy more time. Another important difference between excuses and growth is how boundaries are handled. A person who is growing respects boundaries even when they struggle with them. They may slip, but they take responsibility and correct themselves. A person making excuses often pushes boundaries while explaining why they shouldn't be held accountable for crossing them. Over time, this erodes trust and leaves you feeling responsible for managing their behavior instead of being supported by it. Excuses can also create emotional confusion. You may feel torn between empathy and disappointment, understanding their reasons while feeling hurt by their actions. This inner conflict keeps you emotionally stuck. You start believing that if you just explain yourself better or love them more patiently, they will finally change. Growth does not require you to convince someone to treat you better. It happens because they value you and the relationship enough to do the work themselves. Recognizing that excuses are not the same as emotional growth is not about being harsh or unforgiving. It is about being honest. Growth is visible. It shows up in consistent effort, changed responses, and a willingness to be uncomfortable for the sake of improvement. Excuses keep things exactly as they are while sounding thoughtful and self-aware. When you stop mistaking explanations for progress, you protect your time, your energy, and your emotional well-being. Control often disguises itself as love or protection, which is why it can be so difficult to recognize, especially in the early stages of a relationship. It doesn't usually announce itself as dominance or restriction. Instead, it arrives softly, wrapped in concern, affection, and seemingly thoughtful intentions. What appears to be care can slowly become a set of invisible rules that limit your freedom, your choices, and eventually your sense of self. In the beginning, controlling behavior can feel flattering. Someone wants to know where you are, who you're with, and what you're doing, and it feels like interest. They frame their behavior as worry or protectiveness, saying things like, "I just want to make sure you're safe," or "I care too much about you to let anything bad happen." On the surface, these words sound loving. Over time, however, the questions become expectations, and the concern turns into surveillance. What once felt like attention begins to feel like obligation. One of the key ways control hides is through the language of exclusivity. Phrases such as "no one understands you like I do," or "you don't need them, you have me," are meant to create emotional closeness, but they also quietly weaken your other relationships. Gradually, you may find yourself pulling away from friends or family, not because you want to, but because it seems easier than dealing with the disapproval or tension that arises when you don't. Prioritize the controlling person. Isolation rarely happens all at once. It is built through repeated suggestions that sound loving but serve a restrictive purpose. Control disguised as protection also often targets your independence. You may be discouraged from making decisions on your own, with the explanation that the other person knows better or is simply looking out for you. They might question your choices, your judgment, or your ability to handle situations without them. Over time, this can make you second-guess yourself, leaning more heavily on their approval. What feels like support becomes a system where your confidence slowly erodes and your autonomy shrinks. Another common tactic is guilt. Control thrives when you feel bad for asserting yourself. If you push back, you may be accused of being ungrateful, careless, or inconsiderate. You might hear things like, "After everything I do for you," or "I'm just trying to protect you, why are you pushing me away?" These statements shift the focus from your right to make choices to their emotional response, making it harder for you to stand your ground without feeling selfish or cruel. Over time, love-based control reshapes how you see the relationship. You may start confusing compliance with harmony, believing that avoiding conflict means things are healthy. You may rationalize restrictions as compromises, even when they are one-sided. Slowly, your world becomes smaller, not because you want less, but because you have been taught that wanting more independence is a threat to the relationship. True love does not require control to feel secure. Protection in a healthy relationship empowers rather than restricts. It encourages growth, independence, and trust. A loving partner wants you to feel confident navigating the world, not dependent on them for every decision or sense of safety. They may express concern, but they respect your autonomy and your right to choose. Recognizing control when it is disguised as love is an act of clarity and self-respect. Care should never cost you your freedom, your voice, or your relationships with others. When love is genuine, it creates space for you to be fully yourself. When control is present, even when hidden behind affectionate words, that space slowly disappears. The difference lies not in what is said, but in whether you are growing or shrinking within the relationship. Your intuition is a form of intelligence, even though it is often dismissed because it doesn't arrive as logic, data, or clear evidence. It speaks quietly through feelings, sensations, and subtle inner signals that are easy to ignore in a world that values explanation over awareness. Yet intuition is not random or irrational. It is your mind and body processing information faster than conscious thought, drawing on experience, pattern recognition, and emotional memory to guide you towards safety, clarity, and truth. Intuition often shows up as a feeling that something is off, even when everything looks fine on the surface. You may not be able to explain it, but there is a sense of discomfort, hesitation, or unease that doesn't go away. Many people override this feeling because they can't justify it logically, telling themselves they are overthinking or being unfair. In reality, intuition gathers details you may not consciously register, tone changes, inconsistencies, energy shifts, and patterns of behavior, and turns them into an inner warning system. One of the reasons intuition is so powerful is that it operates beneath the surface of conscious reasoning. While logic evaluates facts one by one, intuition recognizes patterns instantly. It connects past experiences with present moments, allowing you to sense danger or misalignment before it becomes obvious. This is why people often say they knew something was wrong, long before they could prove it. The intelligence of intuition lies in its speed and depth, not in verbal explanation. Ignoring intuition can come at a high cost, especially in relationships. When you repeatedly silence your inner voice, you train yourself to distrust your own perceptions. Over time, this creates confusion and self-doubt. You may start relying more on others' opinions than your own feelings, even when something inside you is clearly unsettled. This disconnect can make you vulnerable to manipulation, because you are less likely to question behavior that feels wrong, but is framed as normal or loving. Intuition also plays a crucial role in self-respect. It alerts you when boundaries are being crossed, even if the other person insists they mean no harm. That uneasy feeling in your chest, the tension in your body, or the lingering anxiety after a conversation is not weakness. It is information. Your body responds before your mind has time to rationalize, offering insight that words may fail to capture. Many people confuse intuition with fear or anxiety, but they are not the same. Anxiety is loud, repetitive, and rooted in imagined outcomes. Intuition is calm but firm, often appearing as a steady inner knowing rather than panic. Learning to distinguish between the two takes practice, but once you do, intuition becomes a reliable guide. It does not demand attention through chaos. It simply asks to be listened to. Honoring your intuition does not mean abandoning logic or communication. It means allowing your inner signals to be part of the decision-making process rather than dismissing them. When something feels wrong, you are allowed to pause, ask questions, or step back, even if you cannot fully explain why. You do not owe anyone a justification for protecting your peace or your well-being. Trusting your intuition is an act of confidence and self-trust. It is acknowledging that your inner experience has value and wisdom. When you listen to it, you strengthen your relationship with yourself. Over time, intuition becomes clearer, guiding you towards situations and people that align with your values and away from those that drain or diminish you. Your intuition is not something to overcome, it is something to respect. It is a quiet intelligence that exists to protect and guide you if you allow it to speak. Self-respect is more important than emotional attachment, even though attachment can feel overwhelming, consuming, and deeply personal. Emotional attachment connects you to someone through shared experiences, memories, hope, and vulnerability. It can make leaving feel impossible, even when staying costs you your peace and dignity. Self-respect, however, is what protects you from losing yourself in the process of loving someone who cannot or will not treat you well. Emotional attachment often grows faster than self-awareness. You bond through intimacy, consistency, and emotional closeness, and soon the idea of walking away feels like tearing something out of your chest. This is why many people stay in relationships that hurt them. They confuse intensity with meaning and fear with love. Self-respect asks a different question, not how much do I feel, but how am I being treated? That question can be uncomfortable, but it is necessary. When emotional attachment outweighs self-respect, boundaries begin to blur. You tolerate words that hurt, behavior that disrespects you, and situations that drain you, all because letting go feels more painful than staying. You start explaining away red flags, minimizing your needs, and making excuses for someone else's actions. Slowly, you adjust yourself to fit a situation that doesn't honor you, believing that love requires endurance rather than mutual care. Self-respect is the internal standard that determines what you accept. It is not arrogance or coldness. It is self-awareness and self-value. When you respect yourself, you recognize that love should not cost you your dignity, your voice, or your emotional safety. You understand that missing someone is painful, but losing yourself is far worse. Emotional attachment may beg you to stay, but self-respect reminds you why you should leave. One of the hardest truths to accept is that strong feelings do not guarantee a healthy relationship. You can deeply care for someone and still need to walk away. Emotional attachment does not measure compatibility, effort, or integrity. It measures connection. Self-respect measures whether that connection is sustainable without self-betrayal. Choosing self-respect does not mean you didn't love enough. It means you loved yourself enough to stop accepting less than you deserve. When self-respect is ignored, the emotional consequences can be long-lasting. You may emerge from the relationship feeling depleted, confused, and disconnected from who you were before. Rebuilding self-trust becomes harder when you know you stayed in situations that hurt you. Self-respect protects your future self, even when your present self is aching. Letting go of emotional attachment in favor of self-respect is not an act of cruelty, it is an act of courage. It requires facing loneliness, grief, and uncertainty rather than staying in familiarity that damages you. It means accepting that love alone is not enough if it is not accompanied by respect, accountability, and care. Self-respect gives you the strength to walk away from what feels good but harms you. In the long run, self-respect creates healthier connections. When you value yourself, you attract relationships that reflect that value. You no longer settle for inconsistency or emotional neglect because you are no longer negotiating with your worth. Emotional attachment fades with time, but the way you treat yourself shapes your entire life. Choosing self-respect is choosing peace, clarity, and the freedom to build a love that does not require you to sacrifice yourself.